Sarah Sherman's
Yeah.
uh, or Jill Hoffman's rather comment. How we get to know each other?
Yeah. Yeah, she's funny. I had dinner last night with her.
Oh,
Uh, mhm, and another friend. So, hey everyone. Gary and I are looking forward to chatting with you here. So, welcome. And I always like to get started a little early so you can make sure you're in the right place and get yourself settled. And we'll start in just a minute. We have a really good topic today. I'm super excited about it. I'm kind of of a nerd about this stuff. So Gary and I nerded out together about it over coffee a few weeks ago, and I was like, "Oh yes, please! Like let's do this." So here we are, ready to nerd out with you today. So um, all the love to the nerds of the world, as I am one. So Gary, I'm sorry I called you a nerd
no,
without
that's okay. I'm used to
you
that.
embrace it.
Yes, I've always been the outlier.
Yeah.
I refer to myself as winter boots because nobody likes my nerdiness till they get into trouble. So I'm like winter boots. They keep me in the closet till the snowstorm comes. And then, oh Gary, can you help us with this? And then
Yes.
when it's over, they put me back in the closet.
I
So
love the winter boots moniker. That's perfect. That is a great descriptor. Okay,
uh,
so it's time. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in and joining us today in this great conversation. I think you'll find it fascinating. It's one of those topics, like Gary said, if you were here just a minute ago, or if you just hopped on, I'll explain it, where you think you don't necessarily need it, but then when you do, you do. And it's really good stuff. So even though you think you might not understand or find something relevant, you are going to be wowed with all this. It's really great. It's very practical and usable. Um, so I'm so excited to have Gary Monty, owner of Center for Managing Change, with us today. Welcome, Gary.
oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Any chance to serve, I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'm so thrilled to have you on as a guest today. So, Gary's here with us today to talk about rapid identification of stakeholder reliability. And put in more layman's terms, how to find a simple spot from which to gauge surroundings and performance in order to keep one's focus and stay on track for success, which I love the topic of success. So I'm all about that. So Gary has over 40 years experience. He's not that old with project and change management,
I started
working
in preschool.
you and me both. Working, teaching, consulting internationally. He's worked with a lot of different industries, from robotics to banking to construction. He developed the business triad, which comprises the business strategy, planning, daily operations, and project management for innovation. And also, maybe the most important part, people and politics, for the
Mhm.
human side of it all, because that's where you can really get into trouble and excel. I'm Libby V, as you probably know, a nonprofit champion and founder of Libby V and Associates. Through visioning and strategy work, leadership coaching, development support, and organizational and board development, our nonprofit leader clients successfully raise more money and have more impact. But not all of you can afford to hire a consultant. So I created the nonprofit Coffee Talk as a way to provide great content and helpful information to as many of you as I can. And I hope you find it useful. Always looking for your suggestions around topics you'd like to see, people as guests you'd like to suggest. Um, Also, please ask questions, type them into your chat wherever you're viewing this, whether it be LinkedIn or Facebook. We love the interaction and we'll address your questions. So, I have a question, Gary, to get us started. What
Okay.
the heck is a rapid identification of stakeholder reliability?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. The short version is, can you trust people? That's the goal here. I work to take chaotic situations and simplify them to an overhead, to a phrase. And because as a leader, you have to move quickly and you have to get your arms around the situation. So that means you have to simplify. Uh, and so that led, in fact, that's been my whole. I got into all this because I became fascinated with problems. I don't know if the audience knows this, but over 70% of the projects worldwide fail. They do not, over 70%, they don't achieve their goals. So fascination with problems got me into this.
Wait, I
Yeah.
have to pause there. So 75% of projects fail. That's not just new projects? That's just like projects in general.
Yes, they either fail to
Wow.
achieve the goal, they exceed their funding, or they exceed the schedule.
And sometimes don't they just fizzle out and go away? Like that
Oh,
happens a lot. I see that a lot where people start things and the energy just wanes and it just dies.
especially in your universe, in the nonprofit world. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because part of the reason I wanted to speak is I deal with emotionality a lot. And what can happen is passion can start a person, like I'm going to volunteer for a nonprofit. But then when the adrenaline wears off, so does their commitment. And so one of the reasons I actually created this. I was running a $30 million program in New Jersey, and I had lots of subcontractors and employees in that I had to get my arms around. So I actually, this is what I'm going to show the audience is my lifesaver. This is the inner tube I used to get my arms around the situation, because as people's adrenaline level goes up and down, so does their commitment. Or they may have an agenda that they did not completely reveal, and they want to use the nonprofit, like to get it on their resume. And then if they get the new job they want or whatever, suddenly they don't show up anymore for the nonprofit meetings. So uh, I think the viewers probably heard enough. This is about finding a certain part of your anatomy with both hands as quickly as you can, so that you can stay on track. And also to help you predict failure. It's important to
Oh,
know when to quit, because you as a leader, you can screw yourself by not knowing when to quit. So what this is meant to be is a stability statement, so that you can gauge. I'm huge on risk management. I've been teaching risk management for like 30 years. And what you want to do as a leader, especially with a nonprofit, is you want to know how stable or unstable the ground you're standing on is. And because you deal with volunteers, well, just because you're dealing with people, they could be paid employees. That's the first most important thing you want to look at is, where are you? Where are you and the people working with you connection wise? Um, the I want to tell you when I want to segue just a little bit. I have this elevator pitch that I worked on that was so sharp, and oh geez, I spent months. And you know what? It's drier than mummy dust. And I learned, when I go to parties and people ask me what I do, I just say adult daycare.
oh,
See, everybody starts laughing right away because they get it.
yes.
So this is the adult daycare overhead, because in fact, when I tell people right away, they say, oh, I work with this jerk, or God, I wish my boss would take the wax out of his ears.
Yeah.
And so this is what it's about. And oh, the other thing before we get into the slides, in the
Mhm.
United States, actually, I've been around the world. There tends to be a macho attitude when it comes to business. So I think nonprofits are viewed as kind of soft, or that's for girls or something like that. I mean, we all know that's BS. And people try to pretend leaders start with their head and then out off their tongue, and out into the world. That's baloney. It's always from the heart to the head
Mhm.
to the tongue.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this crap that, oh, I just leave my heart on the mantle when I go to work.
Mhm.
So when you see what I'm going to show you, keep that in mind. This is meant to be a very
Mhm.
personal presentation,
Great.
because it's all about people.
Yeah. I mean, it is all about people. Everything rests on people when it comes to work.
Yes, and I backed into this because I'm very geeky, nerdy, as was mentioned earlier. And I started out, when I went out on my own back in the early '80s. I was technical. I come out of project management. I mentioned that $30 million
Mhm.
project, and I thought everything was technical. And slowly over time, it took me about 5 to 10 years, I realized no, everything is people. I
Mhm.
have, all my years of practice, I have yet to run into technical incompetency. But what I
Mhm.
run into is flagging commitment and lack of understanding of other people. And that's mainly what kills projects,
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
we're all not on the same page. So what we're going to look at is a way for you, the viewer, you can leave this session and get the replay so you can copy this sheet. In fact, send me a DM and I'll send you a copy of the sheet.
Great.
It's meant to allow you to assess where you are with your stakeholder population quickly. And
Mhm.
then from there, you can decide, like, okay, I need to call Libby in to help me. If you have this sheet of paper I'm going to show you, if you get assistance from someone like Libby, this will speed up your conversation tremendously, because you won't just be beating your breast or hanging from the rafters or yelling Yahoo or whatever. In other words, you can let go of emotionality and you can go to the rationality of the business called nonprofit. So when you bring in people like Libby, oh my God, does this speed up the conversation?
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. I so appreciate that. I'm gonna put your LinkedIn profile uh, link in the chat, and reach out to Gary, and he'll send you that copy, or you can reach out to me and I'll get it to you if you I've got his slides. So do you want me to pull up these other slides now?
Yes, let's jump in.
Okay, great. All
So I
right.
left the word rapid. So the first slide. So first off, what are we doing? We're doing I left the word rapid off here. It's a rapid stakeholder stability assessment. You should be able to do this with a cup of coffee, your favorite beverage, and within a half hour, you should be able to. And by the way, you go with your gut feel when you do this. Don't get lost in your thinking. Um, yeah. So if you go to the next slide. Um, one other thing. A friend of mine was in the infantry, and he actually did ambush training, which is actually fascinating. But one of the things in the military that people do, it's called the foxhole test. And what it is it's based on your gut feel. Is if you were in a foxhole at a front line in battle, how much do you trust the person in that foxhole with you, that you could take a nap and they would wake you up in time if something terrible was going to happen? Okay, that's how I want you to look at this. It's just your gut check on whether or not you could take a nap and trust this person. And by the way, this is quite important with nice people, because you know what? They may not perform. They might be the nicest person in the world, but they may not perform. And Libby, I'm glad you're nodding, because you obviously have run into this, what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so this is from that $30 million project I was
Mhm.
talking about. So what you see on the left, first off, is the individual stakeholder or the group. And we have the president, we have the VP of East Coast, we have 2 engineering departments that I had to work with. Then we had a project manager that reported to me, and then we get down into the team members. So what this is this is a slice of the hierarchy, because, oh my God, there was a lot more people involved. But
Mhm.
for you, the nonprofit leader, I want you to think hierarchically when you do this, because if I can go back to old television, MASH, if Radar O'Reilly got sick or went on strike, what happened to the whole camp? It shut down. Right. So anyway, so we have our stakeholder list. And then here are the 4 things about which we are going to assess people. The first thing is, do you know what their principles are? Do you know what their ethics are? It's important to find that out. And that's why breaking bread with people and getting to know them is important, because the first thing you want to you want to know if you understand the person fully. Because remember, I told you I do risk management. And one of the things that you do in risk management is you look at the worst case. So it's important to know what the individual's principles are, because if certain things hit certain fans, you want to know, are they reliable, or are they, if they're going to bail, can I calculate at what point would they bail? I mean, because anyway, so you want to know what their principles are. And right off the bat, if you can't get a clear read on their principles, I would be suspicious immediately. Um, the example I always like to give about revealing principles. If you look at a marriage, what would you think of a husband that walked in the door and said, "Honey, I want you to know I haven't cheated on you"? Okay, that may sound like a statement of principle. Yeah. So when you have these principle-based conversations, be careful that they aren't blowing smoke, and also be careful that they're not telling you what you want to hear. In fact, can we go to the triad slide? Can we go back? I know this is okay. So the business case is at the top, and that's supposedly what you're talking to the person about. And then when you get your plan in place, you go down to the right and you can start setting up your project. But the important thing is, if you go over to the left, the people in politics, this is where you want to know the principles by which a person governs their life. This is extremely critical. And in business, when I go into work with clients, when their business is stalled or they're losing sales or having operational difficulties, it's always the people in politics. And this is a technologist telling you it's always the people in the politics. Okay, so with that background, if we can go back to the slide. Okay, so you want to know what their principles are. Then the next thing you want to know is, what is their agenda? Because a person may be, oh, you might have a great spiritual connection with them, but they may be so overloaded that their agenda allows for no participation with you in your nonprofit. Or they can give, I don't know, 10% of their time, 20% of their time. But you need to know what their agenda is. And what we're going to look at is it hidden or not? Because a person can tell me no, or a person can say, I can only give 10% of my time. Okay, they've told me, and I need to, if I'm the leader of the nonprofit, I need to adjust accordingly. But let's say they're a people pleaser and they can only give 10%. Well, but they hate to tell me that. They don't want me to feel disappointed. So they get on board and they don't tell me they can only give 10%. And here I'm relying on them for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it's like, oh, I can do Friday morning. What? So
Gary, this is one of those, is this one of those things that's holds up the idiom, actions speak louder than words? So when you're evaluating people, you're really thinking about both, right? What did they tell me, but what am I seeing as evidence?
oh my God, always go on behaviors. Thank you, Libby. I'll give you your $20 after.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Oh my God, did you hit the nail on the head? What is the difference between examining principles and gossiping? It's focusing on behaviors. And if you don't have a behavior, you need to get your trust meter out and decide, oh, how much am I sticking a certain part of my anatomy out the window because I don't have a full read on this person in terms of their behaviors and actions. Yes. So how much do you know their agenda? And notice, I really want to reinforce this. This is just a neutral addressing of where the person is and how they're walking through life. This is not Machiavellian where, oh, I'm going to, no. Okay. Then after you have their agenda, you want their key performance indicators. Did the person do what they said they would do within the time and resources available? Remember, over 70% of projects in the world fail because people fail to meet their commitments. So tracking is very, very important. Now, you don't want to henpeck on this, but you do want to ask when you're having the principle and then the agenda conversation, you want to, before work begins, you want to say, okay, then I'm going to check in with you a week ahead of time that you're going to be available on Friday. And I'm going to call you at 8:00 and we're going to double check. That's so you want to do your part to inform the person. This is the responsibilities to which I'm holding you based on the commitments you made in your agenda. This is extremely critical. Now, what's important about this, remember I said it's from the heart to the head to the tongue. Okay, there's another problem, and we talked about if you leave your heart at home, danger, Will Robinson. But there's another problem if you go from the heart to the tongue. Because what can happen is you can have an individual show up with intense intense emotions, and they run their lives based on emotionality, or at least the work they're doing. The nonprofit, their aunt just died, and your nonprofit somehow ties into, if my aunt only would have gotten better care, she'd still be with us. Okay, that person's making a commitment based on emotionality. And what happens is you need to check that their performance is consistent, separate from what their emotional level is at a given time. And I understand this is important to be sensitive, because I would risk looking like a complete jerk if I just say, "Oh, I know your aunt died, but damn it, how much are you going to do?" No, it's but with the KPIs, you want to drag people back to the reality that as adults, this is what we're going to do in an empathetic way. In fact, sympathy can kill a nonprofit, because people come in with big hearts, bleeding hearts. Well, that's a sympathy-based behavior. It is not a good way to get anything done. Think of your toddlers, playing intensely with their blocks for 15 minutes, and then suddenly they want to wrestle with the dog, and they just totally forgot about the blocks. Okay, and then the last piece is expediency. That's how much will the person flex based on the complexity of the situation, and the fact that with nonprofits, you have a large stakeholder population externally with which you're dealing. Well, man, emotions can be all over the place. So you want to examine the degree of expediency the person will show in a constructive way. In other words, they will flex. "Oh, I said Friday morning, we need to move you to 2:00 Friday afternoon. Can you do that?" So it's important to have principles, agendas, KPIs, and expediency. Have this conversation at the beginning of the relationship. So if we can go to the next slide, let's get into an example. So the criteria that we use, remember, use a gut check, and I love using color. If they're committed, they're green. If they're committed, but it's unsustained or it's iffy, it's blue. And if you're not getting a really good read on a particular element, then you just put down uncertainty. Avoid assuming it's okay, or avoid assuming it's terrible, just uncertain. And then flat out, could they potentially damage the situation? I know of a nonprofit where the executive director went nuts because board members were driving personal agendas over things that occurred in their family. And she had to get rid of her board because they were damaging the nonprofit, because they were using the nonprofit for their personal agenda. Okay, so if we go to the next one, now we're going to walk through it. So here I had this mega project on the East Coast. My boss was the president. His principles were great, present and well-defined. And inside each one of these on your Excel spreadsheet, you can put little notes. Like I just put present and well-defined for principles and agenda. But KPIs, he was spread all over the place. And I knew that, and we had talked about it, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then expediency, he behaved in a very independent way because he had a large external population he had to work with. So he would be shifting gears internally. You never knew he would tell you what his agenda would be, but that would actually be his best guess. So he did what he thought was best for himself. That's independence. So if we go to the next one, here's where, so my boss, the president, delegated power to oversee my work to the VP of the East Coast. We got along well because the success of my work was important for his success. So we had very frank, easygoing conversations, and even with the hard stuff, because we both had the same commitments, because our principles aligned and our agenda aligned. And coming out of project management, I do network diagrams in my sleep. KPIs. And then we had to flex a lot because, oh God, working on the East Coast with unions. Oh, geez. Okay, so then let's go down below the VP. Oh man, the department that scratched out, they were jealous because they wanted what I had. They couldn't succeed. And I came in and I was being successful. They were terrible. They did everything they could to undermine me. It's one of those, they would smile, but their eyebrows wouldn't go up. They were just flat out dangerous. So I had to get rid of them. And then I brought in that department XYZ, and these were much younger people, but they were dedicated and they wanted to get this project on their resume. So I knew they would do overtime without being asked. And so I just took the risk because their principles were developing and their key performance indicators were developing, and they were somewhat independent. But in the end, they did come around, and these all went green. Okay, then the next one, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have the president. He delegated to the vice president. There's me. And then the next in the hierarchy was Claudio, the project manager. And he and I were glued at the hip because he actually did all the technical work and I did all the political work inside the corporation with external stakeholders. So we were glued at the hip. We got along extremely well. And then if we go down, and then like those departments, oh man, have you ever had a team member that you say, would you come to the meeting and work with me? We're putting a strategy together. And no, you do it. You're the boss. No, I need you to come. No, you do it. And then you come back and you start telling them what was decided in the meeting. And that person says, what'd you do that for? Oh, Jesus. Excuse me.
Yes. Been there.
I had to get rid of them. I just had to get rid of them. And I brought in another team member. And so what I did was I had enough green on, notice how this is color coded. I had enough green at the various levels that we were able to succeed. But I spent almost all my time on that business triad on the people in politics. What's interesting is I actually developed the chemistry, the process that we were building a $30 million plant around. I developed that, but I had to let go of that to the project manager who was very technical because I had to graduate to a higher level to keep everything stable. And so I wanted one more point because we only have a few minutes left. Watch your own ego. If you started this nonprofit or got into it because your heart is just all over the place with it, be careful, because what can happen is you can turn into a holy terror. There's a level of intellectualizing of the nonprofit being principle-based, being stable, and it's good to have emotions, but we don't want emotionality. Emotionality is when the feelings are out ahead of the reasoning. Healthy emotions is we reason well in a healthy way based on principles, and then our emotions follow the good, the bad, and the ugly that occurs. So be careful that your own intense emotions doesn't create a train wreck, and then you're just left sitting there in your office with tumbleweed going out in front of you because nobody wants anything to do with you. And you feel saintly and you're wondering, oh, geez, why aren't these people doing this? You need to dial it down. I don't know how else to say it. So there, this is the sheet. The goal is for you to do this. Then if you bring in someone like Libby, you can give her this sheet with the color coding and your little comments in the cells. Well, let me ask you, Libby, if you had a client show up with a sheet like this, what would that do to the conversation?
I would change it. I would just expedite, getting to the meat of it, right? It'd be the right place to start planning for how to execute. It's brilliant. It would be so helpful. In fact, I'm going to adopt it probably for myself when I start projects.
Yay.
Yes, I love it.
I
nerded out about it when you first showed it to me, and today it's even better. It's like hearing it again, right? So, yeah, we have like a couple minutes. This has been amazing. I love this.
If there's no questions, I want to go back to being the leader. And the thing I want to share with you, if you're leading a nonprofit, you want to be a samurai. And when I teach leadership, I'll ask, does anyone know what the word samurai means? And usually what I get is things like boss, manager, leader, president. No. Samurai is a Japanese infinitive, and it means to serve.
Yeah.
And so samurai were only to move based on the principles involved. If they could not identify principles, they did not engage, because the goal was, right, they were the policemen of the principles for that particular societal state. So keep that in mind. you should, and I would imagine it's hard with a nonprofit, especially if it's an emotionally laden nonprofit, to, I don't know, can we just like put the principles aside for a bit because I want to vent or whatever, and I need to just push on Joe Blow to get him to do something? Nah.
Yeah. It blows up. It might work initially for a little while, but it blows up eventually. Yeah. Do you want to show any more slides, or do you
Oh,
want
well, the last one.
Okay.
Oh, yes. I have a request for those watching this.
Mhm.
This is an outtake from a course I have for leaders. It's called Wrestling with Chaos. It's the Leader's Guide to Simplicity, and I validate the course. So if you would send me a DM on LinkedIn, because I need to interview people to find out what's relevant for them when they're in chaotic situations. And if you'll do that, then I'll give you a half hour, an hour of free consulting, to hear, well, how to fill out this sheet, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, I need to make sure my course is valid. So if you would volunteer to let me interview you, I'm not selling anything, but I want the course to be relevant and have punch.
Yeah, that's great. And let's, why don't you send me that request and I'll share it on social media too. So happy to do that and send it out to people. That'd be great. Yeah, happy to do that. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Oh,
I appreciate it. Yeah, I hope everybody got as much out of it as I did and am. I'm definitely incorporating it into my consulting practice. So thank you, Gary, for being a guest today. I so appreciate you and your time and your knowledge and your wisdom and experience with us. It's wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. If I can't serve, I don't know, it's a tin horn, if I don't serve.
Yeah, I love that too. That's one thing I like about you too. Listen, join us next week when our guest will be Heather Yandow with Nonprofitist, and she'll be talking about how to find and utilize consultants in an efficient and effective way. And I think that'll be really useful for you. That's always challenging, I think, to find a good consultant and one that fits. So next Thursday at 11:30, I'll see you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a good week.